A police officer savagely beat a young black boy with brass knuckles, accusing him of stealing a bicycle, but he had no idea the boy's father was an FBI agent. What happened next left everyone in utter disbelief. The 14-year-old black boy pedaled down the street, his new bicycle gliding smoothly beneath him. The wind ruffled his hair, and the rhythmic sound of the tires against the pavement filled him with a quiet joy. The bike was a recent gift from his father, who had saved up for months to surprise him with it. The boy had spent every free moment on it since, memorizing every curve of the handlebars and the precise feel of the pedals under his feet. Today, he was on his way to the park to meet his friends for a game they had planned all week, his anticipation making his legs move a little faster. Can you believe this joyful ride turned into a nightmare? Stay tuned to Adam Alpha to find out. The bike gleamed under the late afternoon sun, its pristine frame catching the attention of people as he passed. Most paid no mind, dismissing it as a boy enjoying his freedom, but as he turned a corner onto a quieter street, a police officer standing on the curb noticed him. The officer's gaze lingered, narrowing slightly as he watched the boy approach. There was something in the boy's presence, the shine of the bicycle, his carefree demeanor, that seemed to irritate the officer. The officer stepped into the street, raising a hand to signal the boy to stop. The boy slowed his pace, his initial confusion quickly replaced by nervousness. He didn't know what he had done to attract attention, but he obeyed, bringing the bicycle to a halt a few feet away from the officer. The officer approached, his boots striking the pavement with purpose, his expression hard, his eyes sharp with suspicion. Without introduction or explanation, he began questioning the boy, his tone clipped and accusatory. He demanded to know where the boy had gotten the bicycle, how he had afforded it, and why he was in such a hurry. The boy blinked, taken aback by the barrage of questions. He answered as calmly as he could, explaining that the bike was a gift from his father. He added that he was on his way to the park to meet his friends, hoping the explanation would satisfy the officer. But it didn't. The officer's expression twisted with disbelief. He scoffed, mocking the boy's answer. He asked where the boy's father was, then sneered, suggesting that perhaps his father was a slave. The boy stiffened at the comment, the blatant racism striking him like a blow. He felt anger simmering beneath his confusion, but he swallowed it, determined not to escalate the situation. As the officer continued his interrogation, his tone grew more invasive and hostile. The boy tried to explain again that he had done nothing wrong, but his words seemed to have no effect. The officer's suspicion only deepened, his questions becoming sharper and more demeaning. The boy glanced down the street, wondering if there was any way to leave without further confrontation. Summoning his courage, he told the officer that he was just trying to get to the park and didn't want any trouble. He adjusted his grip on the handlebars, preparing to move, but the officer's eyes flashed with anger. He stepped closer, accusing the boy of trying to flee. He said that only thieves ran away from the police, implying once again that the boy had stolen the bike. The boy froze, his frustration rising as he struggled to keep his composure. He insisted he wasn't a thief and asked what the officer wanted him to do, trying to understand why he was being treated this way. The officer's demeanor grew colder, his authority bearing down on the boy like a weight. He reprimanded the boy for speaking up, telling him to stay calm and respectful. The boy clenched his fists, his patience fraying. He was just a kid trying to go to the park, yet this man seemed determined to paint him as a criminal. What happens when an officer's bias turns violent? Don't miss the shocking truth on Adam Alpha. When the boy tried to leave again, the officer's anger boiled over. Reaching into his pocket, the officer pulled out a pair of brass knuckles. The boy barely had time to register the movement before the officer struck him with brutal force. The impact sent the boy sprawling to the ground, his head ringing from the blow. Pain exploded across his face as he hit the pavement, the world around him blurring. He groaned, his body unable to move as the officer loomed over him. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth, and tears stung his eyes as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. Passers-by began to gather, drawn by the commotion, their faces reflecting a mix of shock and unease as they saw the boy lying on the ground, blood staining his shirt. Some hesitated, unsure of how to intervene, others called out to the officer, demanding an explanation for his actions. The officer, unfazed by the growing crowd, quickly fabricated a story. He pointed to the boy and accused him of trying to steal his gun. He claimed the boy was a thief who had resisted arrest, his voice firm and authoritative. The crowd murmured among themselves, their doubt overshadowed by the officer's confidence. The boy, still dazed and in pain, couldn't defend himself. He could only lie there as the officer's false narrative began to take hold. The officer grabbed the boy by the arm and hauled him to his feet, ignoring his protests and the murmurs of the crowd. Confident he had control of the situation, the officer began escorting the boy to the police station, his grip rough, his voice curt as he continued to spread his fabricated story to anyone who would listen. The boy stumbled beside him, his legs weak and unsteady from the assault. The officer walked with an air of authority, his head held high as though he had just apprehended a dangerous criminal. He didn't look back at the crowd, certain that his version of events would go unchallenged. The boy, however, felt a deep sense of injustice settle in his chest. He had done nothing wrong, yet he was being dragged away like a criminal, his innocence dismissed without a second thought. As they approached the station, the boy's mind raced. He knew the truth, but he also knew how unlikely it was that anyone would believe him. His heart sank as he realized he was at the mercy of a man who had already decided his guilt. The station doors loomed ahead, cold and uninviting. The boy braced himself for whatever awaited him inside, his body aching and his spirit heavy. At the station, the officer strode in with an air of triumph, dragging the 14-year-old boy along behind him. The boy stumbled slightly, his legs weak from the earlier blow and his mind clouded with a mix of pain and anger. Every step felt heavier than the last as he was forced through the doors and into the cold, intimidating space of the precinct. The officer wasted no time before launching into his fabricated story with an air of authority. He recounted his version of events to his colleagues, describing the boy as a thief who had stolen a bicycle and attempted to steal his gun during an altercation. His words were delivered with confidence, his tone unwavering as he painted a picture of the boy as a dangerous and aggressive criminal. The other officers listened intently, nodding along as the story unfolded. To them, it seemed like a straightforward case. They commended the officer for taking swift action, praising his ability to handle the situation. Their words, full of approval, fueled the officer's arrogance. He accepted their compliments with a self-assured grin, fully believing that his story would hold up without question. The boy, meanwhile, was led to a holding cell and unceremoniously placed inside. The metal bars clanged shut behind him, the sound echoing in his ears. He sat down on the hard bench, his body aching from the blow and his head pounding with the weight of the situation. His thoughts raced as he tried to make sense of what had happened. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, locked up and treated like a criminal. The cold, sterile atmosphere of the cell seemed to close in around him. The boy's mind replayed the officer's actions over and over, the questions, the accusations, the strike with the brass knuckles. He couldn't understand how someone could twist the truth so easily, how a man entrusted with authority could abuse it so blatantly. As the officers processed the incident, they began asking for details about the boy's background. They pulled up his name and information, expecting to find evidence that supported the officer's claims. But as they dug deeper, their confidence started to waver. The boy, his voice low but steady, mentioned his father when they questioned him. Through gritted teeth, he explained that his father was an FBI agent. The officers exchanged skeptical glances, dismissing the claim as a desperate attempt to avoid punishment. One of them even laughed, shaking his head as though the idea were absurd. But procedure required them to verify the information, and when they did, the mood in the station shifted dramatically. The realization hit them like a cold wind: the boy's father wasn't just an FBI agent, but someone with significant rank and influence. The officers who had so readily believed the fabricated story began to grow uneasy, their earlier confidence giving way to doubt. The officer who had struck the boy, however, remained defiant. He doubled down on his story, insisting that the boy was dangerous and had attempted to steal his gun. He repeated his claims with the same conviction as before, refusing to acknowledge the cracks in his narrative. The boy sat quietly in his cell, his head bowed and his hands clenched into fists. He could hear snippets of conversation from the officers outside, their voices filled with tension as they debated the situation. Despite his outward stillness, the boy's mind was a whirlwind of anger and exhaustion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he was allowed a phone call. The officer who brought him the phone did so begrudgingly, his demeanor cold as he placed the device in front of the boy. The boy hesitated for a moment, his fingers trembling slightly as he picked up the receiver. He dialed his father's number, each press of the buttons feeling heavy with significance. The phone rang twice before his father answered. The boy's voice, steady but filled with emotion, broke through the silence as he recounted the ordeal. He spoke quickly, his words tumbling out as he described how he had been stopped, accused, and struck by the officer. He explained how the man had fabricated the story, how he had been dragged to the station and locked in a cell for no reason. On the other end of the line, his father listened intently. The boy could hear the change in his father's tone as the story unfolded, a shift from concern to anger, from disbelief to resolve. His father's voice was calm but firm as he asked for every detail, piecing together the situation with the precision of someone used to dealing with complex problems. The boy finished speaking and gripped the phone tightly, waiting for his father's response. There was a brief pause, the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken emotion. Then his father assured him that he would handle the situation, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The boy hung up the phone and leaned back against the wall of the cell. For the first time since the ordeal had begun, he felt a flicker of hope. He knew his father wouldn't let this injustice stand, that he would fight to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable. Outside the cell, the officers continued to talk in hushed tones, their earlier confidence now replaced by growing unease. The weight of what they had done, and the consequences that might follow, began to settle over them like a storm cloud. The officer who had struck the boy paced back and forth, his jaw set as he tried to maintain his composure. He still believed he could control the narrative, that his version of events would be enough to protect him. But the doubt in his colleague's eyes and the boy's quiet resolve were cracks in the foundation of his confidence, and they were spreading rapidly. As the boy sat in his cell, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The pain from the blow still throbbed, a constant reminder of the officer's brutality, but his mind was clearer now. He thought about his father's words, about the promise that justice would be served, and for the first time since the encounter had begun, he felt a small sense of relief. The station grew quieter as the officers awaited the arrival of the boy's father. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching longer than the last. The boy remained still, his gaze fixed on the floor as he prepared for whatever came next. Without hesitation, the father stood and grabbed his coat, his movements swift and determined. He was a man accustomed to handling crises, and this time, the crisis was personal. His mind raced as he walked to his car, each step filled with purpose. As he drove to the station, he replayed his son's words in his mind, the details sharpening his fury. The journey to the station felt agonizingly long, though he drove with deliberate speed. Each passing second deepened his resolve. He thought about his son, sitting alone in a holding cell, bearing the weight of an injustice that never should have happened. The father tightened his grip on the wheel, his jaw clenched as he imagined the confrontation that awaited him. When he arrived at the station, he parked quickly and stepped out, his presence commanding. The officers at the front desk looked up as he entered, their initial indifference replaced by a sense of unease as they noticed the intensity in his gaze. He wasted no time, asking to speak to the chief of police, his voice calm but carrying an edge that left no room for argument. The officers exchanged glances, sensing the gravity of the situation. One of them quickly went to inform the chief, while another gestured for the father to wait. The father stood near the desk, his arms crossed as he surveyed the room. He could feel the tension in the air, the unease of those around him as they realized this wasn't an ordinary visitor. When the chief of police arrived, his expression was professional but cautious. He extended a hand to the father, who accepted it briefly before launching into a detailed account of what his son had told him. The father's words were precise, each sentence delivered with the clarity of someone accustomed to presenting facts. Yet beneath his measured tone, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of anger. He explained how his son had been stopped without cause, interrogated, and struck with brass knuckles by an officer who had then fabricated a story to cover his actions. The chief listened intently, his brow furrowing as the accusations piled up. The father didn't pause, insisting that the officer's actions be investigated immediately. The chief, caught off guard by both the father's rank and the seriousness of the allegations, nodded and assured him that the matter would be reviewed. The father, unwilling to leave anything to chance, suggested they start by checking the CCTV footage from the area where the incident had occurred, his tone leaving no room for disagreement. As the officers began retrieving the footage, a commotion began to brew outside the station. A video recorded by a homeless man who had witnessed the incident was circulating rapidly online. The man, too afraid to confront the officer directly at the time, had quietly filmed the encounter on his phone. The video, titled "Officer Beats Black Child for No Reason," began to gain traction on social media, sparking outrage. Inside the station, an officer brought the video to the chief's attention. The chief's expression grew grim as he watched the footage on a small screen. It was clear and damning. The video showed the boy riding his bike, the officer stopping him, and the subsequent interrogation. It captured the escalation, the officer pulling out the brass knuckles, and the blow that sent the boy to the ground. The father stood nearby, his arms crossed as he waited for the chief's response. When the chief finally looked up, his face was pale. He ordered the footage from the CCTV cameras to be retrieved immediately, hoping to corroborate the viral video and piece together the full story. When the CCTV footage was played, it confirmed everything the father and the viral video had claimed. The camera angle showed the boy riding his bicycle peacefully, the officer stepping into his path, and the aggressive questioning that followed. It revealed the moment the boy tried to leave and the officer's violent response. The chief leaned back in his chair, the weight of the evidence pressing heavily on him. He knew there was no defending the officer's actions. The fabricated story, the brutality, and the abuse of power were all laid bare. He called for the officer to be brought to his office immediately. When the officer entered, his posture was tense but confident, still clinging to the belief that his version of events would hold up. But as the chief played the footage for him, his confidence began to waver. The video left no room for interpretation, it was clear that he had lied. The officer stammered weakly, attempting to justify his actions. He claimed the boy had been acting suspiciously and insisted that he had felt threatened. But the chief cut him off, his voice sharp as he pointed out the contradictions in his story. The officer's excuses crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The father watched the exchange with cold anger. He didn't speak, allowing the evidence to do the talking. His presence was a reminder of the gravity of the situation, his silence more powerful than any words he could have said. The chief turned back to the father, his expression apologetic. He assured him that the officer would be held accountable for his actions and promised that the department would take immediate steps to address the situation. The father nodded, his anger tempered only slightly by the chief's response. He knew there was still more to be done, but this was a start. He glanced at the officer one last time, his gaze unwavering, before turning and leaving the room. As the father walked back to the lobby, he felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The truth had been revealed, and justice was beginning to take shape. But he also knew that the damage done to his son couldn't be undone with a simple apology or a promise of accountability. Outside the station, the video continued to spread, igniting a wave of outrage. People demanded answers, their voices rising in protest against the systemic failures that had allowed such an injustice to occur. The boy's story became a rallying cry, a symbol of the fight for justice and equality. Inside the holding cell, the boy sat quietly, unaware of the storm brewing outside. He leaned against the wall, his thoughts a mix of anger, exhaustion, and hope. He didn't know the details of what was happening, but he trusted his father to fight for him. The station buzzed with activity as officers scrambled to address the growing backlash. The chief prepared to take decisive action, knowing that the situation demanded nothing less. The father, his expression calm but determined, stayed close, ensuring that justice remained the priority. The chief of police acted swiftly after reviewing the damning evidence. The weight of the CCTV footage, coupled with the viral video, left no room for excuses or delays. He called in the officer responsible for the assault and misconduct, his tone curt and his expression severe. The officer, who had spent the morning defending his actions and maintaining his fabricated story, entered the chief's office with a false sense of confidence. The chief's words were sharp and direct as he informed the officer of his suspension and the charges being brought against him. For the first time, the officer's composure faltered, his confident smirk disappeared as the reality of his situation began to sink in. Moments later, he was led out of the office, his hands cuffed behind his back. The sight of the officer in handcuffs sent a ripple of shock through the precinct. His fellow officers, many of whom had initially praised his actions, now stood in silence, their expressions ranging from discomfort to disbelief as they watched their colleague escorted out. The officers' attempts to meet their eyes were met with avoidance. No one wanted to confront the truth of what had unfolded. In the lobby, the boy's father waited, his arms crossed, his stance firm as he watched the officer being taken away. The sight filled him with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was the first step toward justice, but it couldn't erase the pain his son had endured. The chief approached the father, his expression one of regret. He extended a hand, his voice solemn as he apologized on behalf of the department. He acknowledged the officer's wrongdoing and the failure of the system to protect the boy. The father listened intently, his face unreadable, before nodding once. He accepted the apology but made it clear that this was only the beginning. News of the incident spread rapidly. The video recorded by the homeless man continued to circulate online, gaining traction across social media platforms. The footage, raw and unfiltered, struck a chord with viewers. People from all walks of life shared it, their captions filled with outrage and demands for accountability. Protests erupted in the days that followed, with crowds gathering outside the police station and in public squares. Signs bearing messages like "Justice for all children" and "End police brutality" waved in the air as voices chanted for reform. The boy's story became a rallying cry, a symbol of the broader struggle against racial profiling and systemic abuse. The media picked up the story, amplifying its reach. News outlets replayed the video alongside interviews with legal experts and activists. Panel discussions dissected the case, highlighting the officer's actions and the police department's response. The boy's name was withheld to protect his identity, but his story became a powerful narrative that resonated with people across the nation. When the case went to court, the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back walls, their notepads and cameras ready to capture every detail. The officer stood before the judge, his once proud demeanor replaced by visible discomfort. The prosecution presented the evidence meticulously, showing the CCTV footage and the viral video alongside witness testimonies. The boy's father attended every hearing, his presence a quiet but powerful statement. He sat in the front row, his gaze fixed on the proceedings, a steady reminder of the stakes involved. The boy did not attend, shielded from the spectacle by his father, but he followed the updates closely from home. The court found the officer guilty on multiple charges, including assault and fabricating false charges. The judge delivered the verdict with firm clarity, condemning the officer's actions and emphasizing the importance of accountability within law enforcement. It was announced that the officer had been permanently suspended from duty and would face further legal consequences. The verdict brought a measure of closure to the boy and his father. The police department issued a public apology, acknowledging the harm caused by the officer's actions and pledging to implement reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. The chief, speaking at a press conference, expressed his regret and reiterated the department's commitment to justice and equality. For the boy, the apology and the verdict were steps toward healing, but the scars of the incident lingered. The memory of the assault and the false accusations weighed on him, a reminder of the harsh realities he had faced. Yet he found strength in his father's unwavering support and the overwhelming public response. The father, a man who had spent his career advocating for justice, vowed to use his position to push for meaningful change. He attended forums and meetings, sharing his son's story as a call to action. He worked tirelessly to advocate for reforms, determined to ensure that no other child would endure what his son had faced. The boy, though shaken by the experience, refused to let it define him. He returned to the park with his friends, the place that had once symbolized innocence and freedom. His first visit back was hesitant, his eyes scanning the surroundings as he pedaled his bike. But with each passing moment, he felt a little lighter. His friends greeted him warmly, their laughter filling the air as they welcomed him back. Together, they played the game they had planned weeks ago, reclaiming the joy that had been stolen from them. For the boy, it was a small but significant step toward normalcy. As the weeks turned into months, the boy and his father continued to navigate the aftermath of the incident. The public's attention shifted to other stories, but their commitment to justice remained steadfast. The boy focused on his studies and his friendships, finding solace in the routine of daily life. His father continued his advocacy work, driven by the belief that change was possible. The case left a lasting impact on the community and the nation at large. It served as a reminder of the power of accountability and the importance of standing against injustice. The boy's story, though painful, became a beacon of hope for those fighting for a better future. In the quiet moments, as the boy rode his bike through the park or sat with his father at home, he reflected on the journey they had endured together. The experience had changed him, but it had also strengthened his resolve. He knew the world could be cruel, but he also knew that justice was worth fighting for. Don't miss more powerful stories like this on Adam Alpha, where we shine a light on justice and accountability. Disclaimer: this is a fictional story created to highlight the ongoing challenges of racial prejudice and systemic injustice. It aims to raise awareness and promote the values of equality and accountability in our society. Viewer discretion is advised.